Hey, my name is Nathan Loop and welcome to my network automation course. In this video, we're going to start looking at Python. And like I mentioned in the first video, I think a great way to get started with Python is to have a project that applies to you and your 9-to-5 experience. A lot of times when you're getting started with any type of coding, you make a hello world program, or you might go on and make a calculator, or just these small programs that really don't have any impact to you and you don't see a use for. And then you look at projects that are useful for you and they're enormous and daunting. So I think finding that kind of sweet spot of a small project that's useful, but you can still kind of sink your teeth into is a really good thing. And I was talking to a friend about this, and he thought that for himself an Snmp puller would be useful, and it really struck me as a good idea. A lot of us have access to Snmp pulling software, but usually it's bundled as part of a full network management system. And you might not want to be adding to that. It might be a production system, or it might have really long pull cycles where you're going 5-10 minutes in between your pulling cycles, and you might want to get data out of that faster. Or maybe you just want something small to use for a home lab or something like that. So I think it's useful for that. And while of course there are command line tools like Snmp walk and Snmp get, those you might not be able to get that data out later. It's not storing that data. So I think having a way to regularly run this and store it is actually a pretty useful task. So before we get started, I always think it's a good idea to articulate the goals of the program you're looking for. We're all familiar with scope creep, and when you get started on a project and you keep adding to it, which is fine, but having that predefined goal is a really good way so you don't get too frustrated and you see some progress. So for this, I think the big thing we're going to be looking at is inventory management. So having a way to define our inventory, and then within that inventory management, having the actual Snmp MIBs that we want to pull, so what we're looking for, and having a frequency with which we want to pull it. So defining our devices, defining what we want to see on those devices and how frequently. And then the second part to this will be how do we get data out of this? And I'm a big fan of APIs. APIs are really flexible, and we could talk about why APIs. I think sometimes network engineers roll their eyes when they just hear, oh, API. But we can take a look at that as well. So let's go and take a look at some of the libraries we're going to use for this. So you don't see a lot of scheduling done in Python. I think a lot of time Python is just scripts, and that people rely on the underlying operating system, be it cron jobs or Windows Task Scheduler, to do the actual scheduling of this. But in this case, we're going to have different inventory items, and they might run at different intervals. So I don't want to just rely on the operating system for this. So we're actually going to do some scheduling, and this is a library I like for this. It's just called Schedule, and it's a simple to use scheduling library. So all you do is we're going to have to install it with pip. So we do that pip install schedule within our virtual environment that we talked about. And then once you create a method here in your program, you can create job or whatnot. And then it's fairly human readable, where it's just schedule every 10 minutes, do, and then your job. Or schedule every hour, do in your job. So what we can do here is we can define this in seconds. So we're going to look at within our inventory management, we're going to have for each MIB, it's going to pull a certain number of seconds. So we're going to schedule every however many seconds to do our polling. So that is going to be our scheduling library we're going to use. And then as far as the Snmp, there's a couple different Snmp libraries in Python, but I like this one. It seems like the easiest to use and the most kind of Pythonic to me, if Pythonic makes sense, as far as just a legible, clean code. So in this one, it's pretty simple as well. We're just going to install it through pip, and then you create a session, and then you create a session with your host name, your community string, and the version. And then you can just do session get and then your MIB, and that's going to pull that back for you, pull back the results that we're looking for. So that's pretty easy. So let's go with that one as well. Okay, we are back at our command line. So let's go ahead and get our virtual environment started. And if you haven't been following from the beginning and you're not familiar with virtual environments, I'd recommend going back to that earlier video. They're super useful and definitely the way to go. So let's do source snmp polar virtual environment bin activate. All right, so now we have our virtual environment activated, and now let's do pip list to see what we installed from the original video that we're looking at. So we have some stuff we don't need. I'm not going to uninstall it right now. We can do that later. It's not going to really hurt anything. So what I'm going to just do is pip install schedule is the one we were looking at there. Successfully installed schedule, and then the other one was easy snmp. So it's collecting it, installing, running a setup, and there we go. So now if we do pip list, you see we have our easy snmp and our schedule installed. And I think everything else that we're going to be using in this is already included in Python, but if it's not, we could certainly go back and install it. So now let's start out with our inventory management. Let's create a CSV file. So here we are back in Visual Studio Code, and let's go ahead and let's create a CSV file. So we are going to call this inventory.csv. And let's think about what do we want to use in our inventory file. So first and foremost, we're going to need the host name of the device we're polling, right? So host name is going to be first. So let's just build a sample here. I have a Raspberry Pi on my network, so let's use that. So host name, and then we're also going to have to define the frequency with which we want to poll it, right? So how many seconds do we want to? Because that was one of the use cases that we talked about, was your inventory management system, your network management system, you might not have control over the frequency. It might just be when the poller gets around to it. So let's do every 5 seconds we want to poll this, which is certainly faster than your network management system probably is. And then the next part is going to be our community string, so the password, right? It's password protected, so not anyone can do it, but usually that's still just public. And then our version, so our version number, version 2 is pretty common, so we're going to do that. And then the MIBs. So let's do sysname.0 is a pretty common one. That's just going to be the host name MIB for most devices. So that's going to be my Raspberry Pi. And then let's add a second entry in here. And we have demo.snmplabs.com is one that I found online here for just a public SNMP server. Same thing, it's just using public as the community string, version 2, and oops, we forgot to do frequency. Frequency, let's do this one for 7 seconds. And then sysname.0. Okay. So now we have 2 devices in here, right? So let's save that, and now let's start writing some code to use this inventory file. So let's create a new file here, snmp polar.py. And first thing is you have to import the libraries you're going to use, right? So we need to import easy snmp. And what else did we install? Schedule. We're using a CSV, so we're going to want to do the CSV file. So I think that's it for now. We might have to add some stuff later, but we'll see if we do. And as far as functions we're creating here, we're going to have to definitely make a poll, so to actually poll the device. So let's create our little function there, just empty. And then, so let's open our inventory file next. So first, I just have to open the file in Python. So with open inventory.csv as inventory. Okay, so this is saying that to run the following code with the file inventory.csv available as a variable called inventory. But even though this says CSV, that could just as easily be txt or whatever else. Python doesn't really know that this is a CSV file yet. So we have to tell it, we're using this library here called CSV. Python can work with CSV files really easily and use them as objects. So we have to do that part. So now inventory CSV is going to be csv.reader. So we imported the CSV library, so we're going to use a reader from it. And what do we want to read? We want to read that variable that we have called inventory. So we opened the file we opened our file there as a variable called inventory. And then we created a CSV reader that says, hey, this variable is actually a CSV file. Go ahead and do your magic, Python, and take all that CSV and parse it for me so I don't have to do the parsing. So now what we can do is, so we want to handle this on a row by row basis. We want to go through each one of these rows as an individual item and kind of iterate over it. So we want to go through row 1 and say, this is what I want to do on row 1, done. This is what I want to do on row 2, done. So how do we do that? We create a loop over it. So for every row that we have in our inventory CSV, so our inventory CSV reader created this variable. And so now what we're saying is for every row in that, what we want to do, because this is actually like a whole bunch of lists within lists in there, so it parsed that CSV and has it in a format we can use. So we want to iterate over it and say for every row in it, here's what we want to do. And then the CSV reader took all our rows, and so it split each row into a list. So this is one list, this is another. And so within this list, this is one item, this is one item, this is one item, this is one item. So this is item 0 is going to be our host name. Item 1 is going to be our frequency. Item 2 is our community string. Item 3 is our version. And item 4 is our MIB, right? So we want to say host name. Just to make this really clear, I'm going to name all of these so that we know what we're doing. So host name was row 0, right? And then our second one was frequency. So frequency is row 1. Third one was, so we have community, version, MIB. Community, version, MIB. So community is equal to row 2. Version is row 3. And MIB is row 4. Row 4. Okay. And so these are all going to be strings, right? So it's reading it essentially as a fancy text file. So all these are coming through as strings, because in Python, different variables have different types, whether it's a string for a word, or an integer, or a list is a kind of variable. So these are all coming through as strings, but we're actually going to want our frequency as, that's a number, right? So we're actually going to want to turn that into a number. I believe our scheduler is going to want that as a number, not a string. So that's converting that. And same with version. Version is going to be a, I believe, I remember that this is saying version 2 instead of 2C. So that's going to be a number as well, I think. And now MIB. So let's think about this. So what do we want to do? Do we want to be able to do multiple MIBs per line? I think we do. I think I want to be able to do sys location.0 as well. And as long as it has the same frequency, so it's going to pull both of these every 5 seconds. So I don't have to do a new line every single time I want to do a new MIB. I think that's the way we want to do it here. So instead, let's create another loop here and say that for every MIB that we find in row 4, colon. So what that colon does is that means to the end. So for every MIB that we see in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, until you don't find any more, we're going to run this code. It's kind of like in a IPv6 address when you have the 2 colons. That means everything in between this is zeros. In Python, 1 colon means from here to the end. Or you can actually do it on the other side as well, but we don't from the beginning, but we don't need to do that. We need to do to the end. So everything 4 going forward, we want to do our schedule, right? So let's go back to that web page with the scheduling, and let's borrow some code. Okay, so schedule every, and then this is where we do our frequency. So we created a variable here. So we put in our variable name, frequency, and we want this to be seconds. Seconds, do, and then we called our function here poll. Okay, so we're going to run our poll every however many seconds that it finds in the first item of that row, or second item. It starts with 0. Okay, so, but then we're going to have to pass other information to this poll, right? So this function here is going to have to know who it's polling, what it's doing it with. So to do that, so what are we going to want here? So we're going to want to accept host name, right? Going to want to accept frequency. No, not frequency. We don't care about that. That's done early. That's done already. Community, version, and MIB. So those are the 4 things that we care about here. So let's do that. So let's do the same thing here. Actually, let's just copy and paste that. Okay, so schedule every that many seconds, run the poll using your host name, your community, your version, and your MIB. And it'll do this for every MIB that it sees. So it'll kind of iterate across that list, and then when it's done, it'll iterate down all your lines in your CSV. So you have some kind of logic flows here to go over that file. So, and then, so this is creating, how this scheduler library works is when we've created a schedule, we actually have to tell it to, now that the schedule is created, we have to tell it to run the schedule. And once again, I'm going to borrow their code here. And it says, while true, so while true just means always. while this is true, and it is true, so just run this forever, schedule whatever, just schedule whatever you have pending, and then sleep for 1 second, and then do it again. And actually, this is using another library, like how we use this thing here called CSV, and we had to import it. We're going to have to import time here as well. It's a library that's included with Python, so we didn't have to install it with pip, but it's not included with every, it's included with your Python install, but it's not available. It's not something really basic, just like addition. You know, you actually have to call the library. That's just to save memory and space. So that way, if you don't need those functions, Python isn't worrying about them. So we've imported our time, and we've done that. So now let's write our poll. So our poll here is, let's go back and look at that easy Snmp, and let's go ahead and borrow some of their code as well. And okay, and they actually imported it a little bit differently, so we are going to do that as well. Just they're only importing one piece of that whole library. So it's saying from the easy Snmp library, just import the session part. That's all we need. So we're going to do that instead of importing the whole library. And here we go. Okay, so session, so we're creating a new variable called session, and what that's doing is we're creating a new session, obviously. So host name is going to be host, because we gave it this variable called host. Community is going to be com, because we gave it that variable. And version is going to be ver. And then the next one is it's actually getting the Snmp string. So this is where it's actually pulling it with Snmp. And this is not really location. We might be looking for more than that. So we're just going to say output is equal to session get. And then this is actually just our MIB. And we have a variable, not a predefined string there. And then let's go ahead and print that. So print output. All right, so I think we are done. So we have 21 lines of code here, and I think we have a Snmp puller that is going to use a dynamic inventory file that we can define however we want with frequency and run whatever MIBs we want to get and print them out to the screen. So let's see if it works. So let's make sure that we are in the... My terminal screen is really small here for you guys to probably see in YouTube. So I'm not going to run it in Visual Studio Code. Let's actually switch back to a command line and run it there. So here we go. We're in our command line. We're in the right virtual environment. So let's do Python snmp polar.py. Module not found. No module called schedule. Oh, you know what? I waited a little bit in between creating these videos, and I deleted that. I deleted those libraries we had installed. So really, I was cleaning some stuff up. So pip install schedule, pip install easy snmp. You guys get to see that twice. Okay, and now let's go ahead and run our Python code. So it is saying that it doesn't like the actual scheduling command that we ran. That it doesn't like how we're passing arguments to it. So our scheduling command, it doesn't like the arguments. So I think I just have a syntax error there. Let's go back and look at this schedule documentation. They don't have anything here. Let's see if there's any more documentation. Right here, common questions. How can I pass arguments to the job function? How can I pass arguments to... Okay, so they have this done a little bit differently. They just have, instead of function, parentheses, they just have it all comma separated. All right, I see what they're doing there. So they have like that. All right, so let's save that. And now let's try it again. So we're waiting. It should be, there we go. So there is my Raspberry Pi and the demo server. So we have two things there, but I don't see where it ran my second MIB. So we should have a second MIB here. Sys.location. Let's switch the order here. Sys.location, sysname. Let's see if that runs any differently. If it's... Okay, now it's working. Maybe I had a typo in there. I don't know. I don't, because now I just moved some stuff around and it's working. I suspect did I have a typo under syslocation? Let's do some undos. Syslocation.0. No? Well, it's a mystery as to why that was not working the first time, but it is working now. Let's go ahead and try that in the other order one more time. So every 5 seconds it should be running both the Raspberry Pi name and location. Okay, and it's working. I don't know why I didn't the first time, but it's also really funny. The default location for a Raspberry Pi is sitting on the dock of the bay. So that's funny. So let's just do one more test. Let's move the demo server out to 15 seconds. So we should see the Raspberry Pi run every 5 seconds and the demo run 15. So we should see this go. So there's the Raspberry Pi, and then we should see it come in one more time. There's the Raspberry Pi, and the next time we should see both of them. And Raspberry Pi and the demo server. So it is working. So there we go. So we have our inventory.csv, and we have 21 lines of code here for a pretty cool little Snmp poller. I think we're going to wrap it up here for this video, and in the next video we're going to work on this output, and instead of printing it to a screen, we're going to look at actually either outputting to a CSV or creating an API, the different options we have there for that. I hope to see you there. Thanks.